Welcome, everyone, to the Crew Philosopher Show. I am your host, the Crew Philosopher, of course, and I want to thank you guys that have been, downloading the episodes, listening to the podcast. You guys know I've been doing my interview style podcast episodes with Jonathan Toogood. Salute to him. My guy Miguel, filmmaker. I had my guy Derek on last week, to talk about credit, and I will continue to do those shows, those programs. But look, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I'm running out of people that are qualified to speak about certain topics. So I would love to talk about, law enforcement and the relationship between African Americans and police, and what don't civilians know about, the life of a police officer that they might need to know about, and vice versa. Conversation that needs to be had, but I would like to talk to them with people who are actually knowledgeable. But I'm running out of people to talk to because my reach is kind of limited right now. So I decided, well, look, right now, the goal should be building up a fan base. And so I'm coming here with you, YouTube, and I'm also doing my podcast as well. It's the exact same show. I'm going to put my Ben Shapiro. I'm going to put the audio out on my podcast feed and the video up for the people on YouTube so that they can see. And hopefully we'll be able to build up the brand to a point where I can finally have, people, when people see that you have, 10,000, 20,000 subscribers, it's easier to get a police officer on who feels like it's worth his or her time to talk to you. So that's the goal. So like I said, thank you guys who have been rocking with me. Let's keep growing. Let's keep developing. And let's get into today's show. So today I wanted to talk about a very, very specific issue that many people I think are afraid to talk about. And so you guys know I have this segment is going to be called Today's Cruel Thought, right? The cruel thought for today is, and might be cruel to some of you, trans women aren't women. The end. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Trans women are not women. Full stop. And I feel the need to have this conversation for a number of reasons, right? Reason number one is true. So anytime I get to speak the truth, I'm going to do that. Number two, though, there is this big push to, these are by organizations saying that trans women are women, that women's rights are trans women's rights. And so there's this combining of the two that I think is really dangerous in both a philosophical sense and a practical sense, right? And when I say philosophical, I mean all of these things we've created are arbitrary to a certain extent, right? Like I'm speaking into a camera. It could have been called, a shoe, but it's called the camera. We all agree that this is a camera. We can't have conversations amongst each other unless we all agree that this is a camera. By the way, please forgive me for the ashiness that you see on the hands. Forgot to put on some lotion. I was very excited to make this video. Back to my point. But you understand what I'm saying? So we have to agree to a certain extent about what things are in order for us to engage in conversation. We all have to agree that this is a camera. We have to agree that that this right here is a table. You can't see it, but this is a table. This is a microphone. We won't be able to have a dialogue if we don't agree on these basic points. And so, philosophically speaking, a woman is a woman, a man is a man, and that has been true for the overwhelming majority of human history. And until recently, the past 20, 30 years, that we've been seeing this push to conflate trans women with biologically born women. And those two things are different. They are separate. To simply say that trans women aren't women, well, what that does is it removes the trans category. And so now if I say, hey, she's a trans woman, and then the predominant society will tell me, well, no, she's a woman. I have to push back and say, well, that's not true because she is different from her because girl B is a biological woman, meaning she was born female. Girl A is a trans woman, meaning she was born male and is now a female. And those distinctions matter from a philosophical level, right? And then you have the practical level, the real world level where it matters because you are starting to have issues between biologically born women and trans women because trans women, a certain segment of trans women, I don't know how big the segment is, they believe that a trans woman has the right to compete against biological women in sports, to fight against them in the ring, as if there's no difference in the biological structure between males and females. And therein lies the second problem. So there's two problems here. There's the philosophical argument that I'm making, and there's also kind of the I don't know, the analog, the real world argument that yes, you kind of have to acknowledge that these two things are different, right? But you're not seeing almost any pushback, right? And these are, and some of this stuff is coming down from organizations. Like I think the UN tweeted something, UN Women or something like that. They tweeted something similar, that trans women are women. You know, you've seen the pushback that what's the girl that wrote Harry Potter? J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling got some pushback when she was saying that I support trans issues. I believe that that trans women have a right to transition, whatever. But we cannot erase the biological reality that biological females exist, biological women exist. They are their own separate entity, right? Now you have Joe Biden, who's passing laws that will negatively impact biologically born women as well. And so these things have real world consequences, but there's almost no pushback because the penalty you pay for discussing this topic is a hell of a penalty that if you have any real life, it's not really worth diving into, right? I don't have a real life, so I can kind of go these places. But if you have a real life with a real job, and you have a family, and you have kids and a wife who depends on your salary, you can't just be out here saying things that are true. It'll get you fired. Now you're homeless, all because you wanted to make a good point. And that's why it requires people like myself to be able to speak honestly about these issues, and that's what I'm here to do. And so, as fate would have it, when I was going to do this topic for today, Glenn Greenwald had tweeted something earlier that I retweeted that I really want to read some of it because I do think it points to a couple of issues here, right? So here we go. Some really fascinating findings in this big new Gallup survey on Americans identifying as, quote, LGBT, end quote. It should lead to lots of deeper investigation to understand what explains some of these astronomical changes. But for now, a few points to note. Then his next tweet says, there's been a huge explosion in the number of Americans identifying as LGBT. Close to 1 out of every 5 Gen Z so identifies, about 70%. That's more than a fourfold increase from Generation X, 4%. But almost all of the increase comes from those identifying as bi or trans, not gay or lesbian. Of Americans now claiming, quote, bi identity, the vast majority of them in long-term relationships are in opposite sex relationships, about 33% of them, rather than same-sex ones, 3.7%. So 10 times more people who identify as bi live in hetero-appearing relationships than gay and lesbian ones. Finally, as famed lesbian Katie Herzog notes, there are now, among millennials and Gen Z, more people identifying as trans than lesbian. She has previously argued that masculine girls are now encouraged to identify as trans, causing a decrease in the lesbian population. I'm going to stop there. Great job, Glenn Greenwald. A lot of this stuff I think is being driven with the trans issue. I think it's being driven with the, I don't know, the degradation of, how to describe this? The degradation of gender roles and binary thinking, if that makes sense, right? So, one case in point here that really needs to be hammered home is the fact that there are more trans women now than there are. There are more trans men there are more trans men now than there are lesbian women. And why is that important? Because what we've done really in the past, I would say, especially 10 to 15 years, we have been making the argument that trans people exist, that trans women are real. And so if you feel like your reality matches that of a male and you are born a female, you should transition to being a trans male so that you can live your correct experience. And the same thing is true the other way around. If you are born a male, but you feel like you are meant to be a female, you transition from male to being a trans woman. This way you can live your correct reality, right? But how do you decipher between a girl who is just very masculine. She likes masculine things. She might even be lesbian. She likes women. How is she supposed to decipher between, okay, I'm just a lesbian versus I'm supposed to be a male? So now I need to go and transition to being a male and date women instead of just being a woman who dates women and being lesbian. That's where I do think this conversation gets very, very interesting, right? And so as you have this breakdown of categories, because we have switched certain arguments, women are getting like the short end of the stick for a couple of reasons. Feminism has long argued, and this is something that feminists have to own. They have to own it. They have argued that really gender roles are all that they call that gender roles come from society, right? And biology plays almost no role in the ways that men and women operate. And so, if that is your argument, you kind of lose the philosophical high ground to push back on trans people, because you kind of gave them the weapons to fight with. Because your argument has been that, hey, there's nothing different between men and women, and this has been said by many feminists. There's nothing different for men and women. All or most differences between men and women are largely social, meaning that these are social constructs. And so, what we need to do is kind of break the thinking that biology is responsible for these differences, and that essentially men and women are the exact same creature, just different body parts. That has been the feminist talking point for like the last 30, 40 years by certain prominent feminists. Men and women are the same. We just treat them differently because of sexism, and we look differently because of our body parts. But there is no actual difference between the two. And so feminists are kind of strapped because they can't really push back on the trans argument, because the trans are using the feminist argument against them. Also, what trans people have done, and I think that the entire gay community in general, they have latched on to the SJW viewpoint of the world, where you kind of just view people as spaces on a hierarchy. And so it's like the white male is the oppressor. Under him is the white female. Under him is the black male. And then it's who knows, the black female. Then under that is the black trans male. Then, like, you see what I'm saying? And so trans in the hierarchy, they're at the bottom. And so because they have convinced the world that that language is violence, and that we have to make spaces for the most vulnerable, well, trans in their hierarchy are the most vulnerable. And so they've kind of, put a barrier around themselves to protect them from any critique or even engagement, because they don't feel like they have to engage in certain arguments. It's kind of an ingenious strategy if you really think about it. And so that's what they've done. And so it has kept them from getting critiqued or criticized. I'm not even saying that trans people have malicious intent. I think the trans activists who are spewing this stuff actually believe that what they're doing is the right thing to do, and that the path they're walking down will lead to the quote unquote liberation of trans people. But my argument is, just because you say something is something doesn't mean it is, or that I have to condone or co-sign the way you view the world, because we shouldn't. Trans women are not women. Don't believe me? Do you think most men would have a problem if they have sex with a woman and then she told him afterwards that she was born a male? I think if we're being honest, we would all say, nah, I think most dudes would have a problem with that. That's because most dudes would have a problem with that. Also, do you think someone who was born biologically male and transitioned, post puberty to a female, do you really think that she should be that the trans woman should be competing against the biological woman in athletic sports? No. Fighting matches, MMA, boxing? No, they shouldn't. And then there's even more controversial places we can go, whether or not we believe they should be sharing bathrooms, whether or not we believe that trans women should be sharing prison cells with biological women. Does it matter when they transition? Does it matter? Like, these are all conversations that need to be had, but everyone is afraid to have them. But they all start from one acknowledgement. Trans women aren't women. Saying that fact doesn't make me transphobic. And for you, saying that fact doesn't make you transphobic. I don't want any trans person to be harmed. I don't want any trans person to not have the capacity or the ability to walk down the street without getting assaulted, harassed, etc., etc. I don't want them to be excluded from homes. I don't want them. They should have the same rights up to a certain extent as everybody else. Why did I add that last caveat? Because you are an entity that is living in a reality that does not match your biological starting point. It's just the truth. And so, no, you can't race against biological women. No, you can't have sex with men and not tell them that you are trans. You can't. As far as I'm concerned, that's rape. You can't do it. And so someone needs to push back. I'm here offering to push back. I think I laid out a pretty good case as to why people are so afraid to begin with. But we can't allow this nonsense to continue. And maybe tomorrow, for my crew thought, I'm going to discuss the correlation between the woke, the SJW, the mentally ill, and the spiritually bankrupt. Because they're the ones driving most of this stuff. And I don't think there's been a deep analysis of what's going on here. And I think that is my place to do so. So that'll be tomorrow's crew thought. But today, let's move on to the story of the day, because I'm excited to discuss this. And let me get this article out, because I tweeted it earlier. I saw it. I thought it was magnificent. Magnificent. Because if you guys remember, a couple of weeks ago, I did a story about a woman who worked for the EMT, and she did an interview with the New York Post about creating an Onlyfans because she wasn't making enough money as an EMT. Well, today I saw a story on people.com where a mom, her 3 sons were expelled from Catholic school because of her OnlyFans page, right? Now, let me just redo some of this. All right. I'm going to just redo some of what she had to say about her kids getting kicked out. So her name is Crystal, 44. She goes, "My kids are really good, and all this is doing is hurting them. Take me down. That's fine. But leave my kids out of this. I didn't want to be put out. I didn't want to be put out there. But at some point, I had to stand up and say, I can't take it anymore because this behavior is horrible." Right? Those were her comments. And then when asked why she, started the OnlyFans, she said it was because her and her husband were experiencing marital problems. She said they were on the brink of divorce. And she says, "I was missing that intimacy we had. And a lot of it was because I was going through menopause," she explains. "No matter what you do, you don't feel attracted or sexy. So we tried different things to spice up our marriage." And so they started doing the OnlyFans. It took off. She said she didn't expect it to take off. And she said the first month was $14,000. And we were like, "What?" Crystal recalls, noting that she and Chris now make $150,000 per month for daily photos and posts, all of which are, quote, pretty tame and do not include pornography. She says, "It's a way that I can work on our intimacy and I can live out my fantasies," she explains. "And doing these pictures, it gives you the self-confidence where I'm like, I do feel sexy again. It has made our relationship so much more better in the intimacy part, and the bond of our marriage has gotten stronger." But in July, things got problematic because a dad from the Sacred Heart Parish School stumbled on Crystal's OnlyFans page. And then Crystal says that he told his wife, and she eventually spread the news around the school. Soon, a group of community moms went after her, bringing the photos to the school and relentlessly urging that her sons be kicked out. School caved, and now the kids are kicked out, and Crystal is mad. Now, a couple of things that need to be said about this story. Number one, and I do think I just kind of have to keep saying this whenever a story like this is brought up. Anything you do on the internet is most likely going to be seen by somebody else somewhere. Trust me, somewhere, right? So you should only be doing things if you are willing to either A, live with the consequences of somebody finding out, or B, don't care if somebody finds out about it, right? Like I have people who I went to church with back in Gethsemane who stumbled on my podcast and might find something that I say problematic. But guess what? I don't care what they have to say about me or care what they think. So I'm confident doing my show. But if I did care, then I would probably be a lot more secretive. I would never find an audience because I can't promote my show because I'm afraid of who's going to see what. And so anything you do online, you have to be willing to stand on it and be able to do it in the open, regardless of what your intentions are. That's number one. So everything you do online, somebody is going to see that you know. Trust me. That's number one. Number two, anything you do related to pornography is definitely going to get back to your institution. You know why? Because sex sells. And so when she said that she thought that this was never going to take off, I actually believe her. I don't think she's lying, right? She probably thought, I'm a middle-aged woman. I'm in my 40s. I'm, just doing this to get my sexy back. And so she creates this OnlyFans probably because, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well make some money if I do make some money. And it took off. And once you got to making around, I would say, $5,000 a month, right? Whenever she reached that $5,000 a month territory, she should have immediately begun to think, yes, somebody I know is definitely going to see this. So what's the game plan? What's the game plan? She didn't have any game plan. And it makes me sad that she didn't have a game plan, right? Now, regarding action by the school, I'm split on this because on the one hand, this is a Catholic school, so it's a private institution, number one. Number two, it is clearly a religious school. And so it doesn't shock me that they would not want the sons of a porn star as they would see it. I'm not saying that that's what she is. I'm saying what their perspective is. I understand from the Catholic school's perspective, look, you got all these parents saying, hey, she's living a lifestyle that we don't agree with. We don't want our children thinking that we agree with it. And her children being in the school can be seen or viewed as co-signing her lifestyle. I understand that perspective 100%. But why I'm split is because these three sons didn't know what their mama was doing. And so it's kind of like you're punishing the boys for their mother living a lifestyle that you don't agree with. But then on the other side, you can say, well, from the school perspective, shouldn't the mother be looking out for the best interest of their children? I mean, you got your children in the Catholic school. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decide to get on the internet and take sexy photos of yourself. I get it. That said, I think ultimately I'm against the expulsion because I just don't think we should be condoning students being expelled for behaviors that their parents engage in. If that makes sense, right? Like, it's not like the son, any of them, it's not like any of the three sons could have stopped their mom from doing OnlyFans, even if they wanted to. They didn't know about it, but even if they did know about it, what were they going to do about it? I mean, the mother is grown, they're children. And so by you kicking them out, you're just punishing the kids. And as Catholics, is that really, what God would want? You punish children because of the sins of their fathers and mothers? I don't think so. I really don't. One last thought about this. It just crossed my mind. I don't understand in general. Now, let's move away from the Catholic school, right? Because this story, like I said, I did a previous story about a girl who's working the EMT. Now, she wasn't fired, but she was definitely worried and afraid she will be fired once her OnlyFans information got out there. But one thing that I would like to add, the frequency that these stories are appearing are they're kind of evidence to what I've been saying for a while, which is there's no longer a line between private and personal anymore. And I think people are having a hard time navigating that. 30, 40 years ago, you could do something like go and do, something scandalous and then come back. No one knows anything about you. Or maybe you grew up in a town and you wanted to leave so that people didn't know your history. You can move across town to another state, another city. No one knows who you are. Your past is left where you were. Those days are over. The internet is kind of like walking around with a book pack that has all of your issues, everything you said wrong and problematic inside of them. And so you have to remember that there is no separation between private and personal. So, yeah. I feel bad, man. I really do for the kids. Now, she's making $150,000 a month, so I don't think she'll have a hard time finding another school for her children. But I would love to talk to this lady. Like, her name is Crystal. Like, Crystal, do you even think about or worry about, what happens once your children are cognitive of the fact that mommy does OnlyFans and sells sexually suggestive, photos and whatnot. And look, you're allowed to raise your kids and run whatever type of household you want to. But these are just questions that I would be interested in knowing, just knowing who I am. So, yeah. We are at the half-hour mark, so that's the end of today's show. Thank you for rocking with me. Remember, as always, to rate, review the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. Leave a star, please. A comment helps as well. It helps the show grow. For the YouTubers, please share the video, comment, do your thing. Love you guys. I will be back tomorrow, and once again, we're discussing the correlation between the woke, the SJW, the mentally ill, and the spiritually bankrupt, right? And whatever trending story is trending that day. So, thank you for rocking with me, and I will see you tomorrow. Deuces.